Welcome to Art with Ian. Today we're talking about environment design. That's coming up next. All right, welcome to the first episode of the environment design series. So I've got a little bit of a series overview here so you can kind of know what to expect going through this series. So for episode 1, this episode we're going to go over composition. So that's the first one, right? So basically we're going to be thumbnailing and we're going to be talking about composition and why it's so important to get this down right away. Like the first thing you want to do is nail down a composition, a design, and we're going to talk about some ways that you can improve your compositions here shortly. And then the next episode, episode 2, we're going to be talking about perspective. And so now, once we have a design we like, we're not going to think about perspective too much, or we're not going to put a grid down when we design. We just want to get our ideas out in a free-flowing way. Then once we have a design we like, we can start applying perspective to it and clean it up and get it kind of working to grid a little bit better. So we'll be talking about how to set up a perspective grid in episode 2. I'm going to do that in real time so that you can actually learn how I make perspective grids so you can make your own, because I've noticed that there's not a lot on actually making your own grid on the internet. You know, you can go find grids, other people's grids and stuff, but I think it's really important to be able to make your own very specifically to the needs of whatever it is you're designing. So we'll go over that. Then once we have our comp, thumbnail, our perspective in place, it's time to find references. So it's good in fact to design based on your visual library, but once you're ready to take it to the next level and start painting up your scene, you need references to help push your vision beyond what you kind of think you know about the world. And there's just nothing wrong with reference. I have said this before in other videos, and I want to just reiterate it here. I can't stress enough how important it is to use references. Professionals use references. Next time you play your favorite video game, everything in that game was designed based on reference. Next time you watch a movie, every shot in that movie was designed based on real world references. Doesn't matter how fantasy or sci-fi it gets, always real world references. Okay. After we get our references working, we'll start painting. And the first thing we're going to want to do here is get into values, right? So instead of going straight to color, which sometimes I do, but for the sake of learning here how important values are, I'm going to block the color out. I'm going to start this painting in black and white. And we're going to talk about how important it is to understand the 1, 2, 3 read, which is basically background, midground, and foreground. And each one of those, the 1, 2, 3, they should all be compartmentalized into their own value range. Okay, so there's that. And then, of course, we'll go into color. And that's going to be where we'll talk about how color, how to take your values to color. I'll be using Photoshop, so there are certain ways you can do that. I don't use other software, so hopefully it'll translate over to like Clip Studio Paint and some of the other softwares I know a lot of people are using. I would assume so, but anyway, so we'll go over color, we'll get everything working in color, and then finally we will get into some photo textures, which is basically kind of like this is an optional thing, right? You don't have, it depends on how painterly, how loose, it just depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But the thing about bringing in photo textures is that it can really push the density of your design without you spending 10 hours painting these little cracks, crevices, tufts of grass, whatever it is in your environment that you're painting. I highly recommend you don't use photo textures if you don't know how to paint these things, though. Like if you've never painted the texture of rocks, then just do it, man. Like learn how to do it. Know how to do it, because you're not going to use the photo textures properly if you don't know how to paint it in the first place. I see a bunch of really terrible photo bashing and collaging and stuff. And we're not even photo bashing really. I mean, we're not building our scene with photos. We're just adding texture with photos. Um, so, and then in that episode, we'll probably do our last looks cleanup. But like my last series where we did creature design, I ended up having to add a seventh episode because I realized as I got going that it was going to be better to just do that in an episode. So this might actually get pushed into 7 episodes, but I'm going to try and do it in 6. So that's pretty much that. So let's look at thumbnailing. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing when we compose. We're going to be thumbnailing. Let's talk a little bit about why we thumbnail, because I think a lot of artists, especially younger artists, they kind of want to just draw and then fall in love with whatever it is that you started drawing, and then that's it. And you don't really explore, and you don't pre-vis at all, pre-visualize the stuff. So we want to explore the design concepts with zero pressure to make a good drawing, right? Like, that's what thumbnailing is all about. Number one, right? You're basically, there's no pressure to do a good drawing. You don't care if it's a good drawing. You just want your ideas down on paper. So it develops your idea quickly, ensuring the initial excitement of the piece isn't lost before you land on anything worth fleshing out. So, that feeling of being halfway through a painting, you've spent 6 hours on it, and you realize you just hate it. You hate your work, and you end up having to you either spend another 5 hours trying to polish a turd, or you scrap it and go, that sucks, and then you're depressed and you don't want to do work, and you end up maybe taking a week off from your art. And that can be avoided by just thumbnailing and developing your ideas, and be super quick. Don't take more than like 5 to 10 minutes per thumbnail, and just bang out your ideas. All right, and then lastly, it warms your hand up so you don't go into the painting process cold, which is super important, right? You don't want to go into the painting process cold. Get your hand moving. It's literally like, when I say warm up, I really mean like literally warm up, like get the blood flowing in your hand. It's important. So let's look at my thumbnailing process, and then after that, we'll come back and we'll talk about comp. All right. Okay, so you can see here, I'm just getting my really rough idea down. I put a little horizon in. I know that I want the shot to kind of be this grand, pushed, like a grand scale, like kind of a feeling, epic, like an epic scene. I know that I want some kind of like man-made, like castle type of structure built into this like mountain. And so I want there to be like this entryway like carved into the mountain, and then to show some sign of this castle kind of being built up out of it. So this is kind of like the idea that's been in my head. Idea one, sort of, it gets the idea out so I can see it, and I can also see how it's not really quite feeling, it doesn't quite feel pushed enough. Like, it looks like it was shot with like a 200 millimeter camera or something. Very, very little perspective, kind of flat. And I mean, some of that could be painted out using values, to sell some distance, but I want this place to feel big, you know what I mean? And so here in my second thumbnail, I decided to start by just emphasizing what I want my focal point to be, which is that entrance point to this castle. Also, I'm considering my shape language here. I'm thinking, okay, so do I want this to be, like, do friendly characters live here? Is it like, if this was a game and I show up here, do I think, okay, let me check my items and make sure that I can like deal with some crazy, boss fight or something? Or do I think, oh, this is where I'm going to go meet an important character who's going to join my team? Or, or is it somewhere in the middle where it's like, you're kind of not quite sure, like, if you mess with them, they'll mess with you back, but they're not necessarily good or bad. little more complex, and that's kind of what I'm going for. I'm going for they're not just straight up antagonists, and they're not straight up protagonists. They're like they could be allies, or they could be enemies. So I'm doing just a very little bit of pointing things, and then a lot of rounded forms to try and kind of marry that feeling of like, somewhere in the gray area between good and bad. So this one's getting a little closer now. I like it, definitely like that I've zoomed in, but now I see that and I'm like, it still doesn't feel big enough. So now I'm like going really wide, right? Really wide camera angle here. So this is like probably wider than a 24. This is probably working towards like more like an 18 mil or a 15 mil. Very skewed on the outsides. And in the next episode, we'll be getting into camera and perspective. I don't like to get into those things until the fundamentals and perspective can kind of get in the way of just getting your ideas down. So I try to kind of, I always have it in mind, but I kind of try to ignore. I try to ignore the fundamentals enough to just design, to freely design, instead of putting a grid down and then go. You start. Everything you do kind of looks like homework. Looks like art school homework where it's like, okay, put your grid down and let's learn how to draw to a grid, which is important. But it's also important when you're designing to really loosen up. And that's what thumbnailing is all about. It's about staying super loose, having absolutely no intention of making a good drawing. You're never going to show this to anybody. This is just for you. It's just to help you get your comp down. We're composing. And we're thinking about places on the canvas where we want to sell our focal points. So, that's all. You should be dedicating all of your energy to composition and shape language, design, all of that stuff. That's all you should be thinking about. Now here I'm doing one more. I already know I like 3, but I thought, well, let's just do one more, and turn this scene so that the entrance my entrance focal point is actually slightly sideways. This gives it a more clear and obvious 2-point or second point of perspective. It's actually a 3-point perspective shot, but it helps show like that's, a little more of a 3/4, right? And I just wanted to experiment just to see, if you think something, why not give it a try? I mean, all of these drawings took, I think, a combined like 20 minutes for all 4 of them. So that's 5 minutes a thumbnail. That's just not that long to try something out, especially considering how much time it's going to take to, once you decide what you're going to use and you're going to go to paint, the amount of time you're going to spend painting this comp, you might as well take that extra 5 minutes to throw another thumbnail down. I mean, 4 is actually bare minimum. You could do 8 of these or even more. And typically, the more you do, the more you realize that your initial idea, in this case, thumbnail 1, is very, very much the safe version. What you see in your head is usually the safe version. Okay, so now I've picked the number 3 thumbnail. Now I'm bringing it into, full-size canvas, like a higher res. This is like a 20 by 11.25, which is the same ratio as like HD, same ratio as 1920 by 1080. It's a really good ratio for, environment and design and stuff. And so basically I'm going through here and checking my comp and kind of thinking about the placement of things and, keeping in mind like the rule of thirds and where I want my focal points to be and how I want the eye to lead the eye of the viewer. And just basically refining or denying certain ideas that I had in my first pass. So, this is a good moment here to kind of go, what do I feel like is working? What do I think could be maybe, build the design up that little bit? Like here you see I've decided some of my shape language wasn't quite right. I wanted to keep it feeling more uniform. Like become the guy, the architect, the team of architects who actually made this place. Like, think about, study the world and look at how architects, um, use shape language to create really cohesive looking architecture. So, you have to kind of become, that sort of, you have to take on that sort of mindset. Like, I could have taken it further with the opening and had the opening be rounded too, but I don't want everything to feel, I don't want everything to feel exactly the same. Like, I want to play some shapes against each other, those corners with the rounds. That's kind of like, that is the shape language, some corners and some rounds, basically. And so you can see on the man-made, or the castle, that's really hard to see because of the perspective is pushed so hard. I just put a couple moments on the sides to look at. You can see the way I did, like, kind of like the roof is rounded and then they're angular coming up out of the mountain. So that just continues to follow that shape language. Now I've gotten in here, I've turned my opacity down, and I don't always do this. Sometimes I would just go straight to paint. In fact, sometimes I don't even sketch, I just thumbnail with paint. But for the sake of this video, I kind of wanted to have something to talk about and get a little, a bit of a roadmap happening that's a little easier to talk about and look at as I work. So adding a few other ideas here, like, oh, how do I want to design this out and make it more sophisticated? Obviously, when we get into the episode on reference, that's when we'll really start to push, because I'm just going on my visual library right now. I've seen things like this, like gates, like epic, like think Lord of the Rings, those kind of high fantasy RPGs and movies. They use these kinds of things, This by no means is a design that, unique to me. Like, first time ever someone put a castle on a mountain. Like, no. Obviously, it's like what I would call pretty low-hanging fruit in the fantasy genre. But at the same time, there's a bit of a don't fix what isn't broken mindset that you should take when you're trying to make something for entertainment. So being different for the sake of different, take some of that on board. But if you get so far off the norms that people expect, they won't understand what the heck you're trying to show them. And if they don't understand it, they won't try. People aren't going to try to understand your design. They either will or they won't. And if they don't, they're going to move on. So I highly recommend, when you design, try to think how you can make it yours, how you can make what is iconic in a genre. Like, if you're designing to genre, try to kind of find a way to make it your own without going so far off into crazy land that no one understands. Okay, so we've got the thumbnail. Now let's talk about composition. So I like to use the rule of thirds for my compositions. So let's turn on a third breakup. Now this is just eyeballed, it's not perfect, but so where these intersections show up here, each one of these intersections is, like these, right? Each one of these intersections is a potential focal point, right? Somewhere where you want an area of interest. And so you can see I've used this one here. This is the selling point of the image right here, this gate leading into this place that, who is inside this mountain and built up to the top and everything. So that's what I'm selling. So that's focal point number one, but you can have more than one area of interest in a piece. And so the way to kind of start determining where you want these other areas of interest is you can take a section, like say this section, and you can break this up into thirds. So if we do that, then you get something like this. And now you can see all of a sudden where my guy is down here, who's looking at this, which, the fact that their back is to us and they're looking at this also helps make this the main focal point. This is what they're interested in, and so that's what we're going to be interested in. So this is my second focal point. And that starts creating a little bit more interest for the eye. Like, it's not just there's one thing to look at and nothing else in the piece. matters. But with two, it can be a little static. And so it can be good to add in a third. So let's say we take this section and break that into thirds. And so I didn't actually sketch this when I was thumbnailing, but I'm going to put birds in the sky over here. And I'll probably put it on this intersection. So if we turn on the my chosen focal points here, you can see the most important one, right? So we got to have a little hierarchy of focal interest, right? Number one, this section right here. And now I'm going to be able to play that up even more with my lighting, how I choose to do my lighting. I can, you know, by using contrast, I can also help to make that the most interesting thing. Then my guy is the second most interesting. And by having him looking back at the most interesting thing, it kind of plays this, you know, once you see him, it kind of makes you want to look back over here. And then my least important area of interest is this third up here. And that's just going to be some birds, and I'm going to have them kind of flying, you know, I'll probably try to sort of make a vague arrow out of the shape of them flying, the flock, pointing back at my most important area of interest over here. So you kind of get like a bit of a going this way and then here, and then once you get here, it kind of makes you want to look back. And then I've got these rocks pointing straight into the comp, right? So it's like as you try to leave visually, they're pointing you right back. They're saying, no, go look at that again, right? These rocks here, they're all pointing back inwards. I don't have rocks that are kind of letting you leave. You know, everything that I've done here has been done to try to please the eye and also retain the viewer's attention, basically, right? So that they don't just see it and briefly and then move on. And so we're going to be able to play that up more as we get into color and, you know, value, color, lighting, all of those things. Anyways, so I think that's going to probably wrap it up for episode number 1. I'm really excited to get going into, you know, the meat and potatoes of this series. I love environment, so I love doing this kind of stuff. So I'm really excited to share what I know about it with you guys. I really hope that you guys will find this really useful information. So anyways, yeah, looking forward to it. Episode 2 is going to be perspective, so if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get notifications when I put a video out, which is every Thursday, by the way. Don't forget to like, and I'll see you guys on the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, share it with your friends, ring the bell for notifications of future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.